This is Bernice Jackson interviewing Kathlyn Loepp of Forgan, Oklahoma. And this is Thursday, September the 13th, 1984. Kathleen, tell me about who came first. Did your grandparents, did your parents, or did they both come together?
My grandfather, Milton Maury Green, who was born in Davenport, Iowa in 1852, came to the Oklahoma Panhandle in 1903. He lived here in this country for a period of about 4 or 5 years, which was necessary then before they could prove the claim. And land was so expensive back in Illinois that they couldn't accumulate enough to buy. And of course this land opened up to the through the Homestead Act, and so they came out to no man's land. My grandfather had a very small little dugout one-room home that he lived in, and there was just nothing around him except just the lonely prairie, and he filed on this 160 acres of land. In those days that meant paying a nominal sum of money, but the person had to live on this claim for a period of about 4 years, and then it could be proved, and it would become the possession of the one who filed and lived on it. Now my grandfather, Milton Maury Green, built this little one-room house that was partway under the ground, and it had an attic bedroom. And it was here that he lived until 1908, when my father, who was the oldest Green son, joined him. And my father also proved a claim, 160 acres. This was located 3 miles east of Elmwood and a half north, and it was also located just 2 miles south of where my grandparents came. My father was in the process of building a house so that my mother could come out with him. They came in 1908, in December of 1908. Also in 1908, more of the family joined my grandfather. This would have been my grandmother and Ada Green Steele, whose husband was Howard Steele, and Maud Green, whose husband was Frank Peterson, and my Uncle Clyde Green and his wife Edna, and Mabel and Eva Green, who later married men out in this area rather than Illinois. They were all from Illinois, but they came to Oklahoma. George Green also was one of the sons. He stayed back in Illinois until he graduated from high school in 1905 from Keysburg, Illinois. And this brought all of the Green family out into the South Elmwood district. And they were adventuresome, they were loyal pioneers, they had many, many hardships and so forth, but that essentially gives you a little bit about the grandparents. Now, did you say that you wanted something about my parents also?
Yes.
Well, my parents were Thaddeus Franklin Green, and my mother was Leigh Chamberlain Green. They were married in Illinois in the home of my mother's parents on December the 30th in 1908. And then they came out to this region, the Oklahoma Panhandle, Beaver County specifically, by train. They were met in Liberal, Kansas, which then was the railhead. And some member of the Green family came to meet them in the wagon, which was the only transportation that they had. This probably would have been my grandfather Green, who was Milton Maury Green. Now, the trip out to Elmwood to the claim where Mother and my father lived for quite a number of years took 2 days because, of course, they had only a team of horses. Their first overnight stop in between, because it did take the 2 days, was at the Jeffries place, which was about halfway between Forgan and Liberal, Kansas. The first home of my parents was a very small 2-room house, and it had an attic in it that served as the spare bedroom. And I can remember Mother telling a very interesting tale about this attic bedroom. She had gone up the outside ladder. There was no inside stairway, and she had gone up this outside way to make the bed of the hired hand who had come to help pull broomcorn. And of course, broomcorn was their principal crop at that time. Well, while she was up there, of course, the Oklahoma wind blew, and it blew down the ladder. And there was my mother strapped in the upstairs bedroom, so to speak. Well, she didn't know what to do, and she knew that there was help nowhere near. So she hung out of the window until her arms ached so badly that she realized she was going to have to drop. But she didn't want to break anything, so she looked down and she decided that she could hold on to each one of the boards very briefly, at this tongue and groove board, and she could catch each one of them and it would sort of break her fall. Well, this she did, and she landed reasonably unshaken by the event. But she learned by hard experience that she would have to anchor the ladder a little more firmly before climbing up to make the bed of the hired hand.
That's interesting.
And then claim life. I've heard her speak so much of this. It was harsh, it was trying, and it was very disappointing. And I've heard my mother tell of so many tales of deprivation and the scant social life that the people of pioneer life experienced, with the exception of the church and the box suppers, and she called them literary meetings. I don't know just what that term implied, except that it was a get-together for the people, and of course they met in the church. Now, her groceries came either from the small store at Elmwood, and this was located about 3 miles from where they lived, or from Liberal, Kansas, which was a railroad center, and this was a 4-day trip, 2 days going and 2 days coming. All of the water that they had to be carried in the house by buckets from the windmill, and her washing was done on the board, as many other pioneer people had to experience, and then of course hung on the clothesline to dry. And her ironing was done with an old flat iron that was heated on the stove. So the broom and the dustpan and the rag were her only cleaning tools at this time. And the lights that they had were either candles or a kerosene lamp. And the old wood range that was in the kitchen, located in the kitchen, was their sole source of heat. Now, the neighbors were very few and far between, and mostly they were the Green relatives who lived about 2 miles down the road. My brother Frank was the only member of our family who was born out on the plain. And I can hear Mother telling of some of the very hard life that they did experience. And one of them did concern the storm of 1911 and 1912. There were thousands of head of sheep and cattle that had been brought in from, I believe, New Mexico. And, of course, this storm hit, and my mother's and father's claim was located in more or less canyons out there. And she said there were thousands of them that lost their lives during that storm, the animals. And Mother said that she didn't even see the ground from in the fall of 1911 until well in the spring of 1912. The snow never did melt enough for them to see the ground. And then when they were able, they would get in the wagon and ride through the canyons, and they would pick up the bones of the dead animals, and then they would take them either to Dodge City or to Liberal, one of the rail centers, and they would sell them for $3 a ton. And now that's a lot of bones when you stop and think about them. Mother and Dad didn't live on this claim more than 5 or 6 years, and then at this time Forgan was a very new town. The rail center had come to Forgan, and the little town started, I believe it was in 1910 or thereabouts. My sister and I both were born in Forgan, and then the folks moved away. Dad was a grain buyer for the elevator there. Now that gives you a little bit about the early life of my parents.
Well, that was good. Well, now, let's get back to you.
All right.
Where did you go to school, and what about your early day life?
All right. My early day life was spent, I was born in Forgan, as I mentioned, and then we moved shortly to Beaver. And strangely enough, we lived in the house right across south from Dr. Long, and this house is the house that Ralph Rector lives in right now. And I remember a very striking incident there. I was less than 2 years old, and this sounds incredible, but I was playing with a tarantula out on the front steps. And my mother heard me laughing. I poked my finger at this tarantula, and the tarantula would jump, and then Mother heard me laughing. So she went out, and of course she grabbed me up and carried me to safety. My early schooling was largely in the Beaver schools. We moved away to El Reno, Oklahoma in the interim, and came back in 1924 to Beaver County. My mother taught here in the Beaver schools for a period of 23 years. She served as elementary principal. And so I attended school here in Beaver during that time, and I graduated in 1934 from Beaver. From there I went to college, and I got my first degree. And
where did you go to college?
I went to college 2 years at Chickasha, which was then the Oklahoma College for Women, and then I graduated at Oklahoma State in Stillwater. Then I went back to Oklahoma State. I did my master's at Oklahoma State, but I had other college experience in University of Wyoming, Alva, Goodwill, University of Chicago. I was after a degree that was a little hard to find the right courses, and so I had to do quite a little bit of searching.
And what were you majoring in?
My second degree was in elementary education, but I went to these various schools to get the 36 extra hours that it took to become a reading specialist, and that's the reason that I had to go to these other schools, because
that was something new about that time.
Reading specialist, yes. I think I probably was born too early, because I was many years ahead of the trend, which was individualization, and that was my long suit, and I really was privileged to explore and to share my knowledge in reading specialist, because I attended many of the International Reading Association meetings and was a guest speaker on many occasions describing my individualized reading. I had a very outstanding laboratory at Forgan. Forgan was very good to me in providing anything that I needed in the way of equipment, and we had the money to do it, and so for this reason my program was far in advance of the educational trend.
I remember that. Do you remember
I do.
our Writers Club coming up?
I do. Uh-huh.
We didn't even come up near to what your pupils did, I think.
Well, I was able to handle as many as 35 and 40 students individually with a different program for each one, and I did it, of course, by tape recorders, by reading machines, by speed reading, by other methods, and I combined it with the language arts so that they would not miss out on the basics as they have come back to now. But I was a guest speaker, internationally known, and I was just very proud of the fact that I was able to create this program for the students in our area.
What other countries did you give lectures in?
My lectures were not in foreign countries. My lectures were for the International Reading Association with the conventions here in the United States. But all countries came to these conventions, and so that made it international in scope. My writings that I did in connection were published in Philippine Islands, in Europe, in South America, in well, those probably are the main countries.
What did you write about? Your interest in special reading?
The individualized program and how the average teacher could individualize, because every child is different. Every child is an individual. And I could see that, and I could see that just the classroom teacher could not reach the gifted, the low IQ and everything without some type of individualization. And through mechanized efforts, I was able to do this. And so my program was an example throughout.
Did you publish any books that was used in the different schools?
Not books, but many articles that were published in the International Reading Association magazines, newspapers throughout the United States. I did have the 3M company come from Minneapolis, and they interviewed me in my reading laboratory. They came all the way out here to interview me, and the reason for this was that I used their master console, which could reach many students through a master unit. And so they came out and interviewed me on this to use as advertising for their 3M equipment.
Oh, how marvelous. Well, now then, you feel like that you have really accomplished by helping others in this reading program.
I would hope so.
Oh, I know you have.
I would like to think that I have left my mark someplace in the world. One never knows, but my former students have been kind enough to tell me that I have been helpful, and of course that is comforting.
Sure. And how long did you teach at Forgan?
I taught at Forgan for 18 years, but my total teaching experience was 25 years.
Oh, where else did you teach?
We taught in Liberal, Kansas, and Beaver, and I started in Turpin.
Yes. Now, were you in this particular area when the dust storms were on?
Yes, I was a junior high and a high school student when the real dirt storms hit in the early 1930s. Now, when the very bad dirt storm came in 1935, I was in college. But I do remember the dirt storms of the early 1930s. Everyone in town, we didn't have storm windows in those days, but everyone in town had unbleached muslin that we would tack on the outside with strips of lath over the windows to try to deflect some of the dirt that did come in. But after a dirt storm, I can remember my job as a teenager was to take the little whisk broom, as Mother called it, and the dustpan, and I would go to all of the windows in our huge house. It was an 8-room house, I believe, and I would have to clean out the windowsills. And honestly, there were times, I believe I could be safe in saying there was an inch or possibly 2 inches of dirt, despite the fact that there was a window and this unbleached muslin on the outside. We would scoop off, and literally it was scooping the dirt out of the windows that would be about an inch or an inch and a half to 2 inches thick. And this was my job to do. Now, I can remember one storm that hit on a Sunday afternoon, and I happened to be in the house at this particular time, and when it hit, I held my hand in front of my face, and this is the truth, so help me, I could not see my hand in front of my face, even though I knew it was probably less than a foot in distance. We couldn't see the light in the room. We couldn't see anything. It was just as black as midnight. Now, I remember that storm.
That wouldn't be the one that we know so much about.
No, that was not. That was in
one.
1935. But this was in probably 1934 that I remember this one. It was a bad storm, but it was not the very black one that they talk about. I also remember one dust storm that my brother and I, we were visiting a friend. Well, it was Clark Porter, who lived out on the Spawn. As his mother was related to the Spawns. And we were caught in between the two homes when the dirt storm hit. And the static electricity was so fierce that the only way that we had of finding our way back was watching the little balls of fire that would occur on the barbed wire fence. And my brother and I crawled the distance in between the two homes to find our way back. Now I can remember that one too.
Well, that was a bad one.
That
too.
was a bad one, but it wasn't the worst one the way I understand it.
Yes.
Right.
Now then, where were you? How did the depression affect you? And how did you overcome the depression?
We were affected badly because my mother was the sole support of our family of 3 children, as she was a teacher here in the Beaver schools, and her salary was $85 a month. Well, trying to raise a family of 3 on that, of course, was almost an impossibility, but we managed by scraping. But I can remember one time that my mother, I'm sure that she was desperate, but she handed my young brother and me a sack, a grocery sack each. And she said, if you can find some lamb's quarter, any place in the near area, go out and fill these sacks. And she said, if you can find it, we will be able to eat tonight. And if you cannot find it, we will not be able to eat tonight. My brother and I spent the whole day, and we went to the Beaver River. We combed every roadside, we just went all 4 directions from Beaver, and we spent the day trying to fill those 2 grocery sacks. But I'm happy to say we found enough. Of course, during the dirt storm days, not too much vegetation grew. And we found enough that we could eat that night, and we had lamb's quarter. I'm sure she had vinegar. I don't know. But anyhow, I do remember that. And I can remember her asking, or telling me one time, I had asked for a nickel because we were planning a surprise on our teacher. And we wanted to each contribute a nickel to buy her a gift. And my mother started crying, and she said, honey, if I had a nickel, I would give it. But she didn't have a nickel to give me. And then I can remember the depression also affected my Uncle Clyde Green, who of course came from Illinois. And he and Aunt Edna ran the dairy here. They were the sole source of milk in this area. And I can remember one incident where Mother and I had gone out to help Aunt Edna with the churning. She churned butter and delivered to the various people in Beaver as well as the milk. And times were so very hard that, just everything was vital to survival. And we were out there, and somehow or another, one of the big churns, the kind that you had the stick that pumped up and down. I was an 8-year-old child at this particular time. But that was full of the sour cream to make the butter. And it got tipped over. I don't know who did it, but then nevertheless, it got tipped over. Well, you can imagine what a mess that sour cream made. But my Aunt Edna, bless her heart, she sat down and she started laughing and laughing, and she said, well, I'm just thankful it was the little churn instead of the big churn. And so times were so hard that it made that difference. There were many, many meals that we ate of mush and milk. And if you don't know what mush and milk is, it's a gruel type cereal made out of cornmeal, and Mother used the white cornmeal. And you would fix it with water, and we always had a cow, and so we had the mush and milk, and many had been the meals that was our sole dish on the table. So yes, I can remember the Depression.
Well, I think most of the people went through really hard times.
They really did. But we all were poor, but we didn't realize it because everyone was in the same boat.
That's right.
Children didn't have anything to play with. We didn't have cars. We all walked to school. In fact, Dean Calhoun had the only vehicle sitting out in front of the Beaver High School, and that was an old white nag that he rode in from the country. Because we all walked to school. We just didn't have cars. We didn't, well, it just...
But you children made games, made your own toys.
Oh, yes.
And don't you
did.
think in a way that was good for the children?
It was. It was resourcefulness.
Yes.
It was sharing.
Mhm.
It was making do with what we had. Now, we rolled the little hoops. We made a little crossbar of lath, and then we'd roll a little steel hoop down it, and we'd go all over. Well, we had the whole town of Beaver to go in because, we were just one big happy family then. We would roll tires, and we would jump, and we would play football, and we'd play hide and seek under the street lights, with our area being probably a 4 or 5 block area. And the neighborhood children would get out, and we would play under the street lights, and we could hide any place in that area. We had our boundaries, but
Yes.
we could hide any place. Yes, we were resourceful. We didn't have money to buy anything.
Do you remember playing Annie Over?
Andy over, oh my, yes. And all of the childhood games, Ring Around the Rosie. And
Tell how we play Annie Over, because there's so many young children today doesn't know what that is.
Well, we even played it in the school where I taught when we first started, but it was throwing a ball or some sort of something. I think it was a ball.
I think.
That we would throw over the building, and then someone would catch it and run around to the opposite side and try to hit that person with this ball, and then that person would be on the side of the opposing team, and whoever wound up with the most players was the winner. And it was quite a game. It was just
Now describe the schoolhouse, because so many of them say, how could we throw a ball over the school today? Describe the schoolhouse.
Well, the schoolhouse was that I first taught in was a one-story, and so it wasn't. We would choose a sort of an angle, and we would stand so that one person was more or less on one corner and one on the other, and then we would throw it over in this way.
And it was a one-room school?
No, it was not one room. It was, well, we had four teachers in the grade school and 4 teachers in the high school. I happened to teach English in the high school at this particular time. But we had the 8 teachers in Turpin School. Well, now they have 400 and some students, and I don't know how many teachers, but that would be the comparison.
Well, then this building had 4 rooms in it with 4 teachers.
It was all one building with the gymnasium in the center.
Oh.
And the rooms.
Well, I mean in playing Annie Over. That would be when you would be going to school.
We would choose, we would find a corner of the building, and then we would stand.
Oh, I see. Just throw it over the corner.
Yes, over the corner, because of course the building itself was too large to throw the ball.
And Black
Man's Bluff, that was a game, and Drop the Handkerchief, and those are the games that my children in first grade, when I taught at Oregon, those are some of the games. Of course, the teachers then got out on the playground with the children.
Sure.
That was part of our duty, along with lunch tickets and everything else. Those were some of the experiences that we had.
And when did you marry, and whom?
I married in 1939 here in the Beaver Methodist Church. It was a church that my uncle had been instrumental in designing and helping with the altar. And I grew up in that church. Now, I went to the old church, but of course the memories still lingered.
Sure.
And so I was married there because that really was my home church when I was growing up. I married in 1939 to George Loepp. He was of the Flores community. and he went to school at Greeno. We taught 1 year at Turpin that I had just talked about, and then we moved to Wichita for a period of 10 years. And in that 10 years, we had our family. We have a son and a daughter, and then we had a baby that we lost there. He was an aeronautical engineer for those 10 years in Beech Aircraft. And he happened to be in the power plant and in the engineering department. And he was on special duty, and at the time he didn't really know what it was, but it turned out to be the Norden bomb site that was used in 1945 to end the World War II.
Oh.
And he was under high security at this whole time. But this was his job, and he felt that he did contribute to the end of the war through his efforts in designing this Norden bomb site.
Well, that's great. I didn't know that. Then you moved from there to
we moved back to Beaver County. We lived in Beaver and Liberal, Kansas before we moved to Corrigan. My husband's family came with the wave of immigrants, the Mennonite immigrants, in 1884, and they embarked from the South Russia district, and they traveled to Hamburg, Germany, and they departed from there for the boat trip. And at that particular time, they came by congregations. They were persecuted for their religious beliefs, and so they sought refuge in the United States, in America at that time. And they came and they landed in New York City at Ellis Island, and this was in July the 17th, 1884. Now, my husband's father was Peter Loepp, who also homesteaded in Beaver County. But he first came to this country, and his family settled in Marion County and Reno County in Kansas, close to Hutchinson and Inman and Bueller. This was their area. And he was a child of 10 years old. Well, when he married George's mother, who was Agnetha Jansen Loepp, they came in 1903 to Tyrone, Oklahoma, where they proved a claim. And they lived there for a period of, probably 10 or 12 years before they moved to Beaver County. And they just traded homesteads, is what they had done. And he lived in the Flores region. And George was the only member of a family of 6 children who was born in Beaver County. The rest of them were born either in Texas County or back in Bueller and Inman territory. And George's father, Peter Loepp, did live on the farm, and they farmed in the Flores area for many years. His father was a grain buyer also, as well as a farmer. And of course, they went through the dirty 30s and the Depression just like the rest of us. Now, you asked about the Green family. I can tell you just a little bit about the various ones besides my own parents. I explained about my grandfather and my grandmother, but the oldest daughter was Ada Greensteel, and she married Howard Steele in December of 1919, and they came to Beaver County and filed on a claim near Balco, Oklahoma. And they had one daughter, Maureen Steele Reese.
Were they school teachers too?
All of my family, I think as far back as you can count them, were school teachers. Yes, Ada and Howard, and later their daughter Maureen taught in the various schools, among them Elmwood and Blue Mound and so forth. And Maureen now lives in Crescent, Oklahoma, and they were parents of 4 children, Alfred Jr., Gloria Dawn, Ramona, and Cheryl. I have explained about my parents. It's on the previous slide. The one thing that I perhaps maybe should tell you is that my mother taught here in the Beaver schools, serving as elementary principal for a total of 23 23 years, but she taught for 34 years because she taught part of the time in Illinois. And then Maud Green Peterson, a member of the Milton Morey and Olive Liebendorfer family, came out here also in 1908, and they settled in the Elmwood district also. Now Frank came a year earlier, Frank Peterson, and built the home so that he would have something for his bride Maud, who was the Green, and they lived most of their life near Derazette, but it was in Beaver County.
Yes, I was acquainted with those
Maud
people.
and Frank,
Yes.
but there were no children in that family. And Clyde Green, my uncle Clyde Green, was born back in Illinois, but he came to this Panhandle region also with his parents, and he settled a claim in the Elmwood territory, but later he moved closer to Beaver, a half mile east of Beaver here, where he and his wife Edna Green
They
ran the dairy, yes, the half mile out here. And Clyde and Edna were very, very civic-minded people, and they served their community both as teachers, and Clyde was a county commissioner for many years. And I think the remarkable thing about Uncle Clyde, he was Sunday school superintendent for 25 years. He was just a main part of the Methodist Church where we all grew up. And they had 2 sons and 2 daughters. George Green, also one of the original Green family, settled in the Elmwood territory, and he married Marie Francis of the Logan community. Maybe you remember her.
Francis, the last
Francis.
name?
Yes.
Yes, I remember those.
And they had one son, Leroy, but Leroy was killed very early in his life in an auto accident. However, there was one child. He was married and there was one child. And George was a petroleum engineer, and he lived many of his years in Central and South America as a petroleum engineer, hunting oil. And but later they came back to the United States and they established a home in California near Palo Alto, in Palo Alto, I should say, near San Francisco. And George himself was a teacher in the San Francisco College. He was the head of the geology department there, and Marie taught many, many years in the Palo Alto schools. Another one of the Green family was Mabel Green Hughley. And
Yes, I was acquainted with her.
yes, and they were married in 1916, and they had 2 sons. One of them died very early. He died as an infant, and the son Jack was the surviving son. Mabel also taught school. We were all teachers, I guess. And then Eva Green Evans was
Yes.
the last of the original Green family. She was married to Ezra, and they were married in the church, but it was the little church that was near their claim home in the Elmwood community. I don't recall the name of it unless it was the South Flats. The South Flats Methodist Church, I believe. It is no longer there,
Yeah.
but it was close to the cemetery. But it was very close to their home, and that's where they were married.
It's the South Flat Christian Church. South
There is
Flat
one
of
now.
Christ.
Yes, there is one now, but this was the South Flats Methodist Church that no longer
Oh.
exists, that
I
was
see.
located north of the cemetery itself.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And yes,
This other one is south.
yes, it is south. And Eva was a very, very talented musician.
Just
and
tell
Eva,
us about Eva
and Ezra,
her
well,
husband.
she was a very talented musician, and she taught school many years, but she also gave music lessons to many of us. Her contribution to her family was to give piano lessons to any of the nieces and nephews that wanted that training. And I was fortunate enough to be one of those who did get her musical training from Aunt Eva. And Ezra served as county treasurer here in Beaver County for 22 years. They were highly respected in the community, and for so many years they lived out a mile east and a half a mile south. This was their first home in and it's located from Beaver, I
Do
should
they still
say.
own that home?
They still own the land. They no longer live there. They
No, I
live
know they
in
don't.
Loveland, Colorado.
Yes.
Ezra will be 90 years old in November, and Eva is 86 or 7, I forget.
Could you tell us something about the Evans family?
The Evans family, I could if I could get some information that I have right here in my book. The Evans family originated as Welsh immigrants. And they came, I cannot quote the dates, but they came to this country very early. Now, Ezra was one of a family of 12, and he was child number 7, I believe he said. And, of course, they endured the hardships of early pioneer life. They lived out east of Beaver, some 4, 5, 6 miles, I forget
Yes.
where,
Yes.
on a ranch. And his early experience was with country schools and a large family and hardships, and he attended school here in Beaver, and I think he graduated in 1915 or 16. I forget just when. And by the way, 4 members of the Green family attended this institute that was located, I believe, where the courthouse is now, but I have 4 members of my family who were part of that institute. They called it
this
an
normal
institute.
school they had here
Yes,
at Beaver.
yes. And as
Oh,
you
that's
can
marvelous.
see, that looks very much like the old courthouse. But
Yes.
4 members, Clyde and George and Maud and 5. Clyde and George and Maud and Eva and Mabel were all a part of this group.
Tell me something about this school. You
I
know,
can't. I
you
just
can't.
don't know very much about
You
it.
don't know when it was started, if
I
when it
don't.
ended?
I am sorry that I cannot tell you. I do have the picture, and I do know that they are in this picture, but I cannot tell you except that it took the place of a combination of high school and college
Mhm.
work.
And it
was
prepared
called,
you to teach school.
right. And they would take examinations to, if they passed them, then they were eligible to teach. But
Yes.
it was more than just a high school education. It was comparable, I imagine, to a junior college. Now, that would be my impression. However, I cannot prove that.
In my research in history in Beaver County, I've heard of that school, but just like yourself, I've never found anybody that could tell me who started it, when, or when it ended.
I wish I could tell you more. Now, Aunt Eva did attend it, and she is
I
the
wonder if she
only
would
Green left.
Mm-hmm.
See, all of my family are gone except Aunt Eva.
Do you suppose if you would write to her that you could get that information?
I might be able to. I just might be able to. I don't know.
I wish you would and try to get it to us.
Uh-huh. But I'm sure that their educational standards were quite high.
Yes, I'm
with
sure
the
that.
emphasis on the basics that we are coming back to in
Yes.
our nation of crisis, as President
Yes.
Roosevelt mentions.
Yes. All right, is there anything else you can think of now? You've given me quite an interesting interview, a lot of history that we needed to have on record.
Well, just to bring things up to date, I would like to mention that I do have 2 children. Our daughter is a teacher following the tradition. She and her husband are teachers in Jacksonville, Illinois. And the husband is associated with the state school with emphasis on the handicapped student. And
What is his name?
His name is David Adams.
David Adams.
And he, at the moment, is working with a computer program that is preparing the handicapped students to go out in society and become useful members.
Oh, how marvelous.
It really is quite a specialized field.
Yes.
Our daughter Janice is in the public schools, but hers is a specialized field in that she works with the gifted students. Illinois is quite kind in their educational system by providing for both the very low and the very high, and she is working with the high. Both of them have their master's degree from Columbia University in New York. That's where they met. And our son, by the way, they have 2 children, and we're very proud of those 2 grandchildren. Our son is a lawyer here in Beaver, and he, along with the rest of us, attended OSU and got his degree, his first degree there, and his law degree at OU. Conflicting loyalties, but nevertheless, he is a native Beaver County person, and he has a family of 3 children. So I thought maybe I'd like to bring the family up to date in that respect.
In Illinois, that's where my husband came from, was Jacksonville, Illinois.
Is that right?
And his sister was out to see us just recently, and she was telling me about the school system.
Yes, it's a state.
And so now this really brings it closer home with you telling me about your son-in-law.
Perhaps maybe they can get together, because David knows just about everyone in Jacksonville through his work.
Yes, I can imagine.
We're going there in just a little bit.
Oh, you are? You're going to make a trip there?
Going to make a trip, yes. We have a genealogy trip planned to the East Coast.
Where?
And I'm a genealogy fan, and so we have a member of our family that we are investigating.
Well, is your son-in-law from this area?
No, he's from Jacksonville.
He's from
He was
Jacksonville.
born right there in Jacksonville.
Yes. Well, is there anything more?
I can't think of anything. I'm sure I have
Right
talked.
now you're living in Forgan. You and
We
your
live
husband.
south of Forgan.
Oh, south.
We've lived there for 29 years. And we have a farm, ranch, whatever you want to call it, cattle and farmland. And of course we were close so that we could drive back and forth. And we're just a mile out of Forgan. But I'm a native Forgan person, and I was there when the town started. So
That's your hometown.
that's our hometown.
We noticed on TV here some time ago, they showed where this man came and painted the
Yes.
bank window.
Yes, and let me tell you about this. The early day photographer, Ada Smith, who was photographer in the teens and the 20s in Forgan, and her studio was located where the gym is right now, the big gym. And they called me from the bank and asked if I had any old pictures. Well, I did. Part of them were down here, but I came down and got them, and Fern Radcliffe had some of them. And the photographer nearly went wild. He just shot picture after picture after picture, and it looked on TV as if people were actually walking down the street. And really, those were the 9 teens and the 20 pictures that you saw of everything except the bank.
Is that right?
That is right. And so I wrote the lady who took the pictures. Now I'm doing the history of the Forgan Methodist Church, and I fell heir to all of her pictures, and that's what I have.
Oh, wonderful.
So, but the photographer just nearly went wild on this Charles Kuralt
Yes. Yes.
Crossroads
Yes, that's where we saw
picture.
him.
And all of those scenes except the bank, where they were painting the bank, were these old-time scenes. I don't know whether you caught that or not, but
Yes,
they
I
were.
did, but I thought it was people going by.
No.
They
They took pictures and blew them up of the pictures that Ada Smith had.
and who was the artist now that came and painted those?
I don't recall
I
his
can't
name.
think
no,
of his
I
name
can't
either.
think either. But he is one of he's an endangered species, so to speak,
Yes.
because that is almost a lost art.
Yes.
And
And this young man that was with him, I don't remember his name.
well,
either.
that's Tommy Kirkhart, and he is the president of our Forgan Bank.
No, the man that helped him with the painting of the of the leather?
I don't recall that.
I
He
don't
is
either.
trying to learn the trade
Yes,
so that
I
it
hope
will
he
not.
does.
I don't
That's
recall
good.
his name.
Anything else about Forgan?
It's a wonderful community in which to live. We are just one big happy family with the school and the churches,
Yes.
the center of.
Someone gets sick, everybody comes and
Everyone helps. It's that type of community. We are all pioneers or pioneer children, so to
Yes.
speak, and we're just one happy family. It's a wonderful community, it really is.
Did you know the Lanston, Mrs. Lanston?
Yes, I know,
You
and
knew
of course
her.
Willis.
Mhm.
Yes.
Willis couldn't be here today. He's in Oklahoma City. I was in hopes he could be here and we could interview him.
Yes.
Anything else? Any old timers you want just name for us?
Well, Lester Emmel probably is our oldest old timer in Forgan, and of course he came. And Fern Radcliffe came with the early pioneers, and we're among the old pioneers because I was there when the town started. And George was born at the Flores community. He was born on a farm. Mrs. Ratliff is 90 years old. Ava Lane is 95 years old.
What about the Hodges?
The Hodges were the old timers. Now they're the sons of the pioneers.
Yes, of the pioneers.
Albert and Wayne and Raymond and Johnny
Yes.
and Lucille and Edwin are all in the Forgan community.
And their parents' name?
Was it Will Hodges?
I
It
can't
seems
remember.
to me that that's it, but I'm not sure. I might also mention that the community of Forgan honored my husband when we retired from school 11 years ago. They honored him by naming the football field and the facility out there, the left field. And his name is in the Bonds plaque that is on the building.
That's great. And what did they do for you when you retired?
Oh, they honored us both at a banquet and a community get-together, and we are remembered, I'm sure. We spent 18 years there. We saw the building of all of the buildings that are there, and so, and we're responsible for those buildings. Yes, I think we have.
I think you've left your mark.
Well, I
Not
hope
only
so.
in the town, but in the students that you have worked with people, and those are the most interesting
Our
part
students
of it.
have been wonderful, and they are kind enough to look us up every now and then and
Well, that's great.
tell us how much they love us and how much we love them.
Yes, that's great. Okay, then, if that concludes.
That concludes, and thank you for the
Okay,
interview.
and thank you for coming. You have given me a wonderful
Well, thank
story
you. Thank you.
of the Greens, the Green family, and Forgan and the school. And I think it's so marvelous the work you've done in this reading specialist.
Well, I enjoyed it.
I remember the night, I always thought I was a fast reader until I took that test up there that night.
Well,
And I surprised myself how slow I really was.
speed reading is a skill,
Yes.
and one can learn to do it very easily if one can conquer the skill.
Yes. Okay. Thank you a lot.